Start off with the really easy one. I'm sure you've got this as well. Games in both countries, right? This is really easy. Everybody talks about it. Get it out of the way early. It does a really good job, this tournament, of dispatching this notion that has been given to us from the Champions League or Champions Cup, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to call it the league, where it was like, oh, Liga MX is clear of MLS because they always win Champions League, even though MLS is like one game into their season, right? Well, now we reverse the roles and we see, okay, MLS is pretty solid against teams, not in their regular season run, right? No teams from League MX made it even to the semifinals this year. With that being said, the thing that CCC or CCL does that Leagues Cup doesn't is that it has home and away matches for each side, except for the final for whatever reason. I guess they don't want the crew to, have a chance to poison, I guess, their opponent's back. I don't know. But I don't think Leagues Cup is ever going to have this status of like an elite tournament in the world, and people are going to look at it as important as the Champions League or whatever. But if you want to use this for a lot of prize money and for qualification spots in the Champions Cup, Champions League, it should be a bit more balanced in its schedule. So, and I think we laughed about this when we were doing our preview, right? That one of the groups had a Liga MX side that went from Mexico to Orlando, then up to Canada in like a 4-day span before going home. And they might have actually gotten out of the group and moved on, and gone somewhere else after that. That sort of stuff needs to be balanced out a little bit better than it is right now. And again, giving hub privileges to the top teams is a good start from Liga MX, but it definitely can be made better. And you can do this in a couple different ways by rotating the hosts every year, for example, is something that keeps being popped up there, right? Give Mexico a chance to host every year, every other year rather. I think it's an easy, low-hanging fruit one because it's really, it's a fair complaint, right? If you're going to go ahead and say, oh, we're the best of the best, right? You need to have it in the middle of both team seasons and you need to have it home and away, right? That's why I don't think anybody's going to be able to use Champions Cup or Leagues Cup to determine which is the better of the group. For me, this is a really low chance of happening, and that's because of the way that this tournament is structured and why it's structured the way it is. This tournament's a lot of fun. I know we both have enjoyed it. I know a lot of people have enjoyed it. But the main idea of it, and it's they don't hide it, it's to make money for both federations and attract new fans, right? MLS is trying to hit on their Liga MX fans in its own backyard. The Mexican Federation is trying to make money to stabilize itself. I mean, they canceled ProRel 4 or 5 years ago because teams stopped making money and they kept losing teams and basically about to fold, right? This is a good tournament that brings in a lot of money every year for both sides. Now, and I don't know the exact split of it, but it's quite clear that it makes a lot of money. I don't think that this is going to go anywhere, as unfortunate as it is, because there are more Liga MX fans in America that don't get to see their teams play, who will go out and shell out money to go watch their teams play in this sort of competition, than there are MLS fans in Mexico who are going to. I mean, that I don't know how many of those actually exist, right? And that is going to be kind of an overarching theme for me, where a lot of these ideas are clever in what the sporting aspect is meant to be, but because the tournament really is to help stabilize both federations and grow a little bit, I don't think it's gonna I don't think it's gonna change much.
Yeah, I feel like it's one of those where I agree with you that I think it's unrealistic that it's going to happen, but it's not unrealistic in the fact that it would just take like a ton of work to get it done. And I understand that there are a lot of logistics to it. There's a lot more to the travel than just going from like Orlando to Nashville versus like going to a whole separate country in terms of
Mhm.
having to deal with that. But I do think it's one of the complaints that people have that I do feel like is the most one of the more reasonable ones that could be done if they wanted to do
Mhm.
it. It's not like, oh, we have to shift around the entire schedule of like both seasons and the tournament to make this change work. But it's like if you could just find a way to get a couple games in Mexico, now all of a sudden you're talking about some more balance between teams having to travel. Whereas right now, all League MX teams have to travel. And I'm glad they were able to get some games where it's like home games for them where they got to play a bit closer to Mexico. But still, I mean, obviously that's still a far cry from being in Mexico. I mean, granted, if you looked at the stands of a couple of those games where Liga MX teams were playing, it might as well have been a home game because they absolutely showed out for a lot of games. I think back to the San Jose, I think Chivas game, which shattered records, and I can't imagine that shattered records because of the San Jose Earthquakes, the way they've been playing this season.
Well, the Quakes haven't had terrible turnout, but yes, that is
Yeah, but they're not all of a sudden shattering records because they're playing GVAS.
No,
It's
no.
because of
And the thing for me is I didn't even include this idea of like the top 8 teams from each area host, and then you build around them because that's the logistical nightmare, right? Like, okay, how do we do that? And then who gets the quarterfinals, who gets the round of 16, who gets the semis, who gets it? That's the logistical nightmare. I don't see it ever happening. But doing a full flip and saying, okay, this is Liga MX's year, this is MLS's year, that I don't think is terribly difficult to do so long as Liga MX's infrastructure is able to handle that, which I think it should be. But yeah, because of what this is supposed to be, I don't see it happening.
I don't think they should do full like flips on who hosts because MLS has obviously way more teams than Liga MX does. So you're going to get situations where two MLS teams are playing often, and playing those games in Mexico makes zero sense because, to your point before, there are a lot of Liga MX fans in the US. I don't think it's the case vice versa. I don't think you're going to find a lot of MLS fans in Mexico. So to play two MLS teams in Mexico, I think is going to be poor turnout and people just not really caring for the games. So I don't think we should do as much as it is a logistical nightmare to kind of balance between both countries and trying to appease all the fans on who plays where. I don't think switching games to fully being done in Mexico makes sense either.
Well, you still have those turnouts as well. I mean, you remember the Mazatlan versus might have been Juarez in the first edition of this thing where they played in Austin and it had like 200 fans show up. Like that's the same thing you would get there. So I think on both sides of it, you're going to have those issues. Now it'll be more prevalent with the flip of what it is now, right? Like as you mentioned, there are more
A lot more
MLS
prevalent.
versus MLS.
I think there were only like what, two groups that had two Liga MX teams in it,
Yes, yeah,
and then there
absolutely.
was like eight with two MLS teams in it. So it's like
Yeah.
it would be
Well,
way more often than just one game of, I mean, Juarez versus Mazatlan, which let's be honest, is like even for Liga MX standards, that's pretty bottom of the barrel.
yeah, yeah, and I don't disagree with you. I'm just sounding it out here because it would make sense again. So there are two ways you have to look at this. It's from the sporting side of it versus the monetary side of it. What's better for both ends, right? If you are, and this is why I mentioned it, because if you're going to make this to qualify for the Champions League, it needs to have a little bit more balance, in my opinion, right? That's like almost saying every game is going to be played in Minnesota for qualification for whatever. I don't know. That was a bad example, but you know what I mean? Like it feels like you're tipping the scale a little bit, which isn't ideal, right? That being said, what's the true point of this? I don't necessarily see it as a secondary kind of competition to qualify. People are complaining, like, oh, it's a money grab, it's a money grab. If you took away the Champions Cup spots, I'd still enjoy this competition, right? I think it's fun, I think it's enjoyable, and that's what everybody's like. Oh, you can't do this because it's just a money grab, and you're tipping the scale to Champions Cup spots and all. Yeah, like it's definitely not structured properly for that. That doesn't mean it's not fun, right? So you could take away those Champions Cup spots. I've got no problem with it. I think it's still a fun thing to do. If it was built, I almost think that if it was built to say, hey, we're doing this so that, and again, transparency, right? We're doing this so that both federations can have a little bit more money coming in and they can have this access to new fans and all this stuff. And it's just going to be a little, side quest almost. I'd still enjoy it, right? But I also don't really care either way because Champions Cup again doesn't have the same level of importance. We've been through that too. But yeah, I don't really see this happening, but we'll see because a couple things are starting to change here in a little bit. But I do want to ask you if you have anything different from that.
No, I mean, I don't really have a problem with it kind of giving a Champions League spot because, I mean, let's be honest, the scales are already tipped by the fact that only two leagues in all of North America get to compete in this competition. It's not kind of open to whatever leagues. It's not like the US Open Cup where there's four or five leagues competing and then, there's different equivalents to that in each country, like the Canadian Championship. I mean, it's the same thing. It's kind of the same thing in England. I mean, if you win the Carabao Cup, if you win the FA Cup, you get a European spot. So I think it's going to be the same thing here. I mean, to be honest, Liga MX and MLS sides are the strongest teams. And so it's not surprising to see them kind of have a shot at another Champions League spot because, I mean, you're getting more of the better teams in the competition then. I definitely think there is an argument for it being more, I guess, favored towards MLS by having all these MLS home games. But obviously, we talked about how that may not be super easy to kind of rectify that.
Yeah. What else? What you got? What else you got?